Hello and welcome to Political-psych-abby. Our question this time is, why are rich people less charitable? Not in total dollar amounts, but compared to the amount they could give. This question comes from Erica from the Cocktails and Capitalism podcast, which makes this my very first collaboration episode. Anyway, Erica was curious about the psychology of generosity and how that interacts with wealth because of her experiences as a charity fundraiser. You can hear more about those experiences on the most recent episode of the Cocktails and Capitalism podcast. I'll put a link to it in the description. And I definitely recommend the podcast in general. They talk about all sorts of serious and important issues while drinking fun cocktails. When Erica first asked the question, I was actually slightly skeptical about whether rich people really are less charitable. But then I thought about something that happened to me. When I was 15, I went to an art history and photography program in Florence, Italy. I come from a pretty well off background, but the kids in this program were from another world, and that world was gold plated. More than half of them attended boarding schools. I was the only person there who went to public school. I did not get along with these kids for the most part. Admittedly, at 15, I was not an easy person to get along with. Anyway, one day I was talking to one of my classmates, and somehow we got onto the topic of Obamacare. My classmate said she was against it because it meant her father, who I think was an eye doctor, would be able to buy her one less designer purse per year. I asked her if she really thought she deserved a purse more than some poor kid deserved health care. She said she did, and said something about working for it, which I found really confusing, since she wasn't working for it, her father was. I tried to argue with her, but I'm not good at arguing, especially on the spot. Eventually, I just sat there, sort of stunned. It was weird to hear someone be this blatant. Of course, loads of us choose some selfish things over giving to charity. I do it too. I too have a designer bag. From an outlet store, of course, and I've only got the one. There's nothing wrong with a little selfishness, but it's disturbing to think that rich people would choose it more, especially given that a rich person choosing to be selfish can have much bigger consequences. This, of course, is my personal experience. It could just be a one off incident, not at all representative of general reality. So I did some research to find out if rich people really are less charitable overall. It turns out that they pretty much are, but there are nuances involved. Obviously, some rich people give more money away than we can even conceive of. But a lot of rich people also have more money than we can conceive of. So, probably it isn't best to view this sort of generosity in raw dollar amounts. In other words, we should look at the charitable giving proportionally, as a fraction or percentage of the total wealth an individual has. Giving away one slice of pie when you have 1,000 pies is very different than cutting your own slice of pie in half when you have only one. I think I might just be hungry. Also, whether or not rich people are more or less generous in experiments where they have to distribute or keep a set amount of money are somewhat mixed. Still, one could argue that a rich person who decides to pocket $100 from a psychology experiment instead of giving it away is different than a poor person who does the same. Like, a poor person could really need that $100, and a rich person probably doesn't. So, these experiments fall into the same trap as quantifying generosity in terms of raw dollar amounts given to charity. Viewing generosity in terms of the percentage of people's money they give to charity probably makes more sense. Many sources indicate that lower income households donate a higher percentage of their money to charity. Some studies indicate that the percentage given is actually more flat. Apparently, this is a difficult thing to collect data on. With my 1 year of college economics, which largely consisted of poorly labeled graphs, I do not feel comfortable giving a conclusive answer here. Even if we assume that the rich and poor give equally, I would actually expect the rich to give a higher percentage of their money to charity. After all, they need less of it. I mean, you might not expect a straightforward increase because wealthier people might also live in somewhere with a higher cost of living. Still, one would expect it to go up far more than it does. So, yes, the wealthy are less generous. Overall, obviously, there are a lot of individual exceptions. So, why is that? Well, that's where psychology comes in. A key thing we have to do is rule out that this is all caused by some third factor, as in, does something that causes people to be rich also cause them to be less generous? I can't say this doesn't happen at all. After all, someone who likes money and fancy things might be more motivated to become rich and also more motivated to keep their money. However, a number of possible causal links between wealth and decreased generosity can be seen, and I'll demonstrate them later. For example, Paul Piff rigged a game of Monopoly to systematically advantage one player and cause them to get richer and richer compared to their opponent throughout the game. Players were randomly assigned to be richer or poorer in the game. The randomly richer player tended to behave more aggressively and even attribute their own victory in the game to skill, even though the game was clearly rigged. This experiment isn't specifically about charitableness, but we can see that making someone feel wealthy temporarily changes their attitudes and behavior. Piff has also done research that indicates wealth leads to less charitableness. This suggests that wealth changes a person and, indeed, may make them less charitable. I should mention that an attempt to replicate some of the work on this topic did not find significant results. That does not necessarily mean it disproves Piff's work, but it does make things somewhat less clear cut. Sometimes science, especially social science, is messy like that. In addition, children from wealthy backgrounds have been found to be less altruistic than their peers. It is technically possible that a third factor is still at play here, but if it were, it would have to be genetic. After all, one assumes that the small children in this study did not earn their wealth. Genetics is not really my area. From what I can tell, genetics may have some limited influence on both charitableness and wealth, but it is far from solely responsible for either. Furthermore, I don't think anyone is proposing that genes for charitableness and wealth are in some way reverse correlated. Also, living in a world where some people are just genetically fated to be wealthy and less charitable would suck so much. Fortunately, it doesn't seem to be true. This suggests that the environmental effects of wealth on altruism are strong and can affect people even early in life. So, if we conclude that wealth really does make people less charitable, how might it do so? Before I get into the serious discussion, I just want to say that I know not all charities deal with issues relating to inequality and poverty, but enough of them do that I will be devoting much of this video to talking about charity in relation to those specific issues. Anyway, back on topic. A possible factor behind reduced charitable giving is that wealthy people are more likely to attribute inequality to talent or hard work. You could conclude this attitude might be helpful in accumulating wealth. After all, believing you can change your fate does probably make you more likely to try. However, the study that found that wealthy people are more likely to attribute success to personal factors was done on undergraduates. At that age, if you are wealthy, it is probably due to your parents. So it seems like being wealthy makes you more likely to see economic differences as a result of differences in the amount of work people put in or the talent they have. An increased tendency to believe that those who are poor are lazy or incompetent does seem to decrease charitable giving. Interestingly, this tendency of wealthy people not to pay so much attention to context seems to extend to social context and therefore may interfere with empathic abilities. Krauss, Coate, and Keltner found that upper-class people were worse at judging the emotions of others. This has fairly obvious consequences when it comes to charitableness. This study is far from the only one to demonstrate reduced empathy and attention to others on the part of wealthier people. A possible reason for this is that wealthier people have to rely on others less and therefore do not need to put so much effort into maintaining social relations. I'm of course not saying that wealthy people are assholes. Psychology rarely talks in terms of good and bad people. What I'm saying is that there are environmental factors to being rich that can make people behave in slightly more assholish ways in various conditions, and that one of those situations is charitable giving. There are also some circumstances which seem to make the effect of wealth on charitableness worse. Rather terrifyingly, one of these circumstances is high income inequality. Coate, House, and Willer Found in the US states with the most income inequality, higher income people were less generous. However, the trend reversed itself in states with lower income inequality. Weirdly, when the researchers instead simply told participants that income inequality was either low or high in their home states and then gave them a charitable giving opportunity, they also got similar effects. This suggests that perceptions of inequality may be what matters here. The authors posit that people are less likely to help people who seem really distant and different from them, and inequality is a form of this distance. So, yep, the more money the rich have relative to everyone else, the less they may be inclined to give away. That's a bit of a yikes. So, other than the fact that a lot of very worthy causes could be getting more money than they are, why does any of this matter? Well, partially it's about taxes. One of the cases against taxing the rich more is that it might reduce charitable giving. The psychological evidence indicates that this is likely not true. In addition, wealthier people in many countries are able to take advantage of tax incentives for charitable giving that are not open to the less fortunate. I'm not sure if there is a conclusive answer about whether these incentives work, since maybe wealthier people would give even less if we did not have them. Also, it's important for people to understand the effects of wealth on charitable giving. This is especially important for those doing fundraising, since understanding these effects can help them figure out who to target and how with their appeals. It is also important for the rest of us to understand this because the perceived generosity of the wealthy, especially the super wealthy, affects the way we see them. Black and Davide found that when rich people spend their money on charity, people are more likely to see them as successful on their own merit and more deserving of being rich. If we as a society see the rich as more generous than they really are, this further skews the world in favor of the rich. So, how do we deal with this problem? There are a number of psychological mechanisms that might do some good here. Keltner posits that some of the brain weirdness associated with wealth and power can be reduced if powerful people, which wealthy people usually are, at least comparatively, temporarily stop feeling powerful. There is some evidence of this happening with powerful people who experience illness or natural disaster. I can't realistically advocate for putting anyone through these experiences on purpose. If you just want to get more money out of rich people for a worthy cause, emphasizing agency is a good place to start. Willens, Caruso, and Dunn found that if a charitable appeal focused more on individual action, it appealed more to wealthier people, whereas more communal messaging appealed more to the less affluent. I don't think every or even most issues that charities deal with can be solved via individual action alone, but that does not mean that individualistic messaging is pointless in the right context. Piff et al. Found that when people attribute poverty to situational factors, they become more opposed to inequality and willing to take part in egalitarian actions. Since charitable giving is an egalitarian action, and charitable giving can often be a way to fight inequality, this is very promising. The issue here is that getting people, especially wealthier people, to stop blaming people for their own poverty and suffering is difficult. Piff et al. Were able to change what people attributed poverty to via a writing exercise and a computer-based poverty simulator. I'm not sure people are just itching to engage in writing exercises about poverty. In terms of a computer-based poverty simulator, well, my most played game is Brick Breaker. But some people will play anything, so I urge any game designers in my audience to give poverty simulators a shot. There are real-world ways of encouraging empathy and changing the way people see issues like poverty. Media has been shown to be able to reach people emotionally and change their attitudes in a way that hard data often can't. For example, the TV show Will and Grace, which featured a gay relationship, was shown to reduce homophobia, especially among people who did not regularly interact with gay people in their everyday lives. Perhaps media can also do the same thing for people who have little regular contact with the needy. I think the struggle here is that things like poverty are inherently grim in a way that homosexuality is not. So it might be harder to get people to just casually watch it. These more psychological solutions show potential, but psychology alone is not enough. What a lot of this research indicates is that the rich can't and won't fix everything. Part of that is that being rich might actually make it harder for them to see and empathize with problems. So, no, we can't even blame individual rich people, although there are certainly some individuals who are better or worse than others. Inequality creates need for charities, but seemingly it may also decrease the donations they receive, both because the less affluent have less to give and because the more affluent may give less. So, in truth, the best way to deal with rich people being comparatively less charitable is probably to reduce inequality, which is not something psychology on its own can do. Sorry for ending on a bit of a downer there. Anyway, do all those liking, commenting, subscribing, bell things. Check out my Instagram. It's at Political-psych-abby, where I post more political psychology stuff and also baking and cats. If you've got a political psychology question, stick it in the comments or tell me about it on Instagram. Thanks for sticking around, and thanks again to Cocktails and Capitalism for the video idea.